So, welcome everyone to another OZeWAI Ask the Professionals. Very excited about this one. We had a wonderful event last year, this time on accessibility testing, and it was quite generalized. And there were a lot of discussions asking basically about some more specific topics to focus on. So today we will cover some what's going to happen next with mobile apps and with the wonderful panelists and the expertise that we have with us. To get us started, though, I'm just going to share an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting here in Canberra. And I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And I welcome, feel free to put in the chat your name, your role, if you like, and who you pay your respects to today, whether it's here in Australia or overseas. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Bree Norton. I'm co-chair of OZeWAI with Amanda Mace. We are a not-for-profit organisation, used to be an annual conference, turned into a professional membership, and now we run these monthly events. We actually changed our annual conference to work with in-partner conferences instead, where we actually think that accessibility should be talked about, and they're not. So we have some wonderful partners with Web Directions and UX Australia, which we did recently, which is great. We also, please consider joining. We have a very cheap joining fee of $50 for advocacy. And we are building up what our membership benefits are. We've been doing this for 2 years, so there's still a lot that we're learning from people, and we are open to feedback. I am going to now hand over to Gian, who is going to be moderating the panel today, and they'll do some introductions with the rest of the panelists. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bree. And OZeWAI has been operating for, I think, as long as I've been in accessibility, so like over 20 years. It's a fantastic organisation, and I definitely recommend that you join. I was secretary for a few years there. I wish I could contribute more. Just a little bit about me. The first thing you should know is that I have long COVID. I've had it for over 2 years now, so my brain doesn't operate as well as it should. I might miss words here and there, and I am a bit of an advocate for people who are suffering long COVID as well. I'm the CEO, founder, and president of AccessibilityOz, as you can tell by the background. We've been operating internationally since, been operating in Australia since 2011 and internationally since 2015. And I'm the chair of the mobile site and native app accessibility testing guidelines. And so basically that's a bipartisan set of mobile testing guidelines, because the accessibility industry as a whole was not really, okay with how WCAG kind of addressed mobile requirements. I'm just going to very briefly share my screen and show you where you can find those guidelines, and I'll also put them in the chat. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I just want to make sure you all have that information. So they are on our website, even though they're bipartisan, and you can find them under the resources section, mobile testing. There's 2 methodologies, one on mobile sites and one on native apps. There's 2 introductory documents on, how you actually capture errors, devices that you test on, and then basically your test cases, including quite detailed instructions on how you test with assistive technologies. So those are quite helpful, and RAF, I hope, and RAF was part of the committee, so hopefully that can assist in the future. So we have a great panel today. I'd like to get everyone to introduce themselves. I'm going to start off with Ricky, because Ricky has been in accessibility as long as I have, and he's absolutely amazing, done some work for us and done some work for basically every accessibility company out there. So Ricky, take it away.
Thanks, John. My name is Ricky Onsman. I'm the principal technical writer for TPGi, which is a US-based digital accessibility consultancy that operates around the world. My job is to basically write guidance for a big team of accessibility engineers, which means I do a lot of testing myself of a lot of things, but not necessarily testing client sites necessarily, but testing just to find out what the right way to test is. I'm based on the south coast of New South Wales in Australia, which is why it's dark around me. That's about all you need to know for now, I think. Back to you, Gian.
Excellent. And next, I'll hand it over to Raf, who's worked with AccessibilityOz for about a decade now, but that was not how he started in accessibility. Raf, take it away.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm Raf, as Gian said, and actually it will be my 10 years with AccessibilityOz, I think in October.
Oh.
So at AccessibilityOz, I work as a tester and assistive technology specialist. My adventure with accessibility started much earlier. First, I was assistive technology user. I'm blind, so I used assistive technologies. I studied English, and then I started to help at the university. I helped to build a computer lab for students with disabilities, and then I worked there. So that was the start.
Excellent, thank you. And next, I don't know Paul and Genevieve, so you guys will have to toot your own horns. But Paul, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, it's so nice to be invited in this meeting, all the way from Europe, from the Netherlands. I'm Paul. I'm working at a company called Abra, and we're focusing only on mobile apps. I'm working with a lot of clients directly, like giving them trainings, helping them with testing, doing audits, like everything that's needed for companies to mature on the accessibility. And besides that, like in the recent years, we've figured out that like automated testing and the process of manual testing, that it's quite a challenge for a lot of companies, and we invested heavily in software and like are having a solution that like can help with testing and make it way easier to test mobile apps. So happy to be here and looking forward to all the questions that will be asked.
Excellent, thank you. And Genevieve.
Thanks, Gian. Hi, also happy to be here. My name is Genevieve Lake. My role is an accessibility senior specialist at Telstra. My background is web development, and I enjoyed a lot of different disciplines. I like to dabble in UX and design, a bit of business analyst, which kind of led me down the accessibility path. For the past 3 years, I'd say my primary focus has been app accessibility, so mobile accessibility, which I believe is why I'm here today. So yeah, very excited to talk about it, share what I know, and listen to hear from others too.
Excellent, thank you. So Ricky, you did tell us a little bit about your role, but how much is accessibility important to you, and what brought you to accessibility in the first place?
Well, I started as a freelance web designer and front-end developer 30 years ago. Pretty much, I think I built my first website in 1994. And at that stage, it was pretty straightforward, obvious that accessibility should be part of building a website. You naturally want to make it usable by everybody. And at that stage, it was actually pretty easy because it was all HTML, static sites, very little CSS, no JavaScript. And then as things got more complicated, it became a specific task to make websites accessible. I was working for a disability information and referral center, and I built their website in order to be accessible. And I gradually just got more and more into being a freelance web designer, and everything I built, I made it accessible by default. 25 years later, that made me a subject matter expert on accessibility. And I was working with a lot of companies like AccessibilityOz and Intopia, as well as overseas companies like Tenon. To me, it's one of those things that really falls into the area of human rights. And as the world has become more and more digital, it has become more and more important. I honestly thought that I would be making myself redundant in no time at all. I would just get all this stuff done, and then I wouldn't have a job anymore, and that would be perfect. I'd have succeeded. And 25 years down the track, there's more work than ever. And in fact, it's more complicated than it's ever been. So this is, for me, it's an ongoing task, and one that I find fascinating, but it has the side effect of being something that really matters to a lot of people.
Yeah, I definitely think, talking about AI, which hopefully we don't have to talk about at all anymore in this after my comment, is I do feel like as accessibility specialists, we won't be taken over by AI, because the whole point is we find the bugs, right? We find where the machines can't actually find the issues, and we find workarounds. So, Paul, tell us about how important accessibility is to you, and what brought you to building a tool, and you talked about how the manual testing and the automated testing was a little bit difficult. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I have a bit of a different background. So I was still, I think, at lower school when Ricky already started building websites. I started just before COVID. I was building apps with a team in Ukraine, and like for smaller project, I came in contact with a freelancer, Jan de Groot, and he told me something about accessibility, and I was like, okay, show me where the information is. Like, show me a website where I can read about it, because it's like guidance and like website, like should be some guidance like about like the laws and like about the guidelines about. And he said like there's nothing. So at that time we just said, okay, let's start a few hours a week as a project, and let's see where we stranded. Step by step, we built like an ecosystem of like we created the app foundation, and we started with building a knowledge base, and that led to a project where we. At that time, it was for me still a business opportunity. So like just like trying to get like a new business into our company. But at a certain moment, we created a reporting app where people with disabilities were reporting issues that they encountered, and we created it in such a way that people that were blind with the screen reader on were able to make screen recordings of their issues. And we were sending that to companies for awareness and also to fix issues. But we got like around 600 of them. I think I fixed around 500 of them. And so I really got in contact with a lot of end users. And then it got me really passionate about this topic. And I really want to make apps accessible. And we're doing really a lot of projects also for free, sharing knowledge for free to get there. So it started with business opportunity, but now it's really like, when you see someone struggling to read the app of their daughter for school, or that they want to make the temperature in their room a bit higher, and then it's like only connected with an app, and they have to turn the screen reader off, somehow manage to make it higher, turn it on again to check if they did it well, that they have to do it like 6 times in order to make it work. That for me, it was a big reason to be really strong about making apps accessible, and that's what we're doing. So
I do feel that like the longer you work in accessibility, the more of an evangelist you become.
Yes.
Watch out for that, Paul.
It's also risk.
Genevieve, what about yourself? You work at Telstra. How important is accessibility to you, and what brought you to accessibility?
I was fortunate to be in the position that an accessibility team was being stood up, and I was part of the design system team at the time. So it was kind of like a natural progression. But yeah, I jumped at the chance and honestly haven't looked back. I'm also fortunate enough to be in a team where I've got great mentors and people that I work with to learn from them. Why am I passionate about it? I think specifically looking at app accessibility, a bit like Paul mentioned, there's just not enough out there about it. And I think web accessibility has been around, in comparison, a relatively long time. And we need more. We need more research out there. We need more people advocating for it. the more that I find out about it, the more that I think, how is this not a bigger thing?
Yeah.
We're all on our phones every day. How is it not bigger than what it currently is? So I think there's a real drive to work towards it. That's kind of where my passion is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And Raf, what about yourself? I can imagine that accessibility is important to you because it's very difficult for you to use digital devices without some level of accessibility. But what made you stay in the accessibility industry?
Okay, so as I already said, I started as a user, and when I ran this computer lab at the university in Gdańsk, I'm located in Poland, by the way. So I did the everything. So I trained students, took care about the equipment. I was a kind of call scientist, a kind of information center for people, for instance, parents of blind children, etc., etc. I also built a basic website for the students with disabilities, and web developers from the university started contacting me to learn about accessibility, how to build pages properly, which was very nice. And so that was my start. So I started to share my knowledge also at some conferences, etc. And after 10 years at the university, I moved to private companies. I was hired by Ivona Software. You may not know the name Ivona. Ivona Software may not may not mean anything to you, but certainly you know Amazon Alexa. So Ivona Software is the company. It was bought by Amazon. So Amazon voices are made by Ivona Software. And there we did two things. We did regular testing, and I did accessibility testing of interfaces, of voices, etc. And also we provided customer support. So I provided customer support for regular customers and for customers with disabilities. So step by step, I was more and more engaged in various accessibility processes. Then I worked for a company which made orientation navigation apps and other apps for blind users. So I helped to design these apps and tested them. And I'm working for AccessibilityOz. So that's my story.
Thank you. Thanks, Raf. And I'll go back to Paul now. Do you conduct mobile site and native app testing, or is it just and I call them native apps testing just to, mobile site, native app, that's how I differentiate between the two. But yes, do you do both testing, or are you just focusing on the native apps?
We're only focusing on apps because what we see is that for websites, there's a lot of options available to inspect the code and to do things automatically. So you can better test websites on desktop only. Yeah. Also, if it's a mobile website on your mobile phone, it's sometimes better to get the bunch of issues already detected on your desktop device, because mobile testing. Yeah, I always say like there's an issue on your screen, a certain element does not have a name. In order to report it to someone else, that the person can actually fix it, it takes you maybe 10 minutes, because you need to say like, I'm on this device, I'm having this software version, I'm in this app, on this screen, in this element, and it has this issue, and this is how you should solve. It's like it takes a lot of time. So if you can automate things, it's nice. So if you for websites, there's quite some options available, and for apps, yeah, you have your screen and your screen reader, assistive technology, and your external keyboard, and you're just testing, and then somehow you have to report that issue. So what we have been building in the last years is that we're filling gaps that we see in the market. Like one, if you can find something automatically, just scanning the screen on certain rules. Of course, if you can do something automatically, it's better than doing it manually or with end users. If you have to test manually, the reporting part, it's not the most fun part. Like adding a print screen to your report, it takes you like, if you have the screen reader on like, I don't know, 10 or 15 clicks, it's quite a challenge because it's very boring work, and it's not, if you want accessibility to work in teams of developers, don't tell them to make print screens and like have 15 clicks and that it's like fun to do. It should be like 1 or 2 clicks, and it should be clear what they should test. So what we see is that the testing part in mobile is really based on a lot of manual testing, and that's a big challenge, and it takes a lot of time. And also what we see is that on the WCAG guidelines, that it has techniques and tests, and there's the ACT rules, and it has everything for websites. But there's no techniques how to fix apps, and apps is like smaller market, but it has more, let's say, options of how the screen reader reads something native or in a web, in a hybrid app or in a cross-platform app, it reads it differently. So it's quite a big challenge, and we focus on making the testing as much as automated as possible to make the manual testing like fun and easy. And it starts with like that you have the knowledge to get there. So we created like ABRA rules, and we hope that more and more people will contribute to that. But basically the ACT rules for websites, it's really nice because if you can follow them, you know that you're at a certain level and that your tests are good enough. But what we see is that for apps, they were not present, and that's why we created like a rule. Like for example, like an interactive element should have a name, very simple rule. It has a description, like for why, how should you test it? What's the impact on end users? What are certain scenarios that it can occur? But also, what's the solution? And not only like native, but also cross-platform, and also some like that's 10 different programming languages we have, so that if you have an app, that you can also solve it. And that's also for developers important, that if they get a ticket, that they are able to understand what's going on and that they can learn. And then we move teams into a higher maturity level by doing that. So that's our challenge, and we're quite far, but we're working really hard to be able to test, to find things automatically more, and to make the testing flows even more fun and easy. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it definitely is. Genevieve, what about yourself? Do you test mobile sites or just native apps?
So just native app, I'd say for the past 3 years. And like, I'm glad we're discussing it because there is quite a difference between the two. So, and it's interesting hearing from Paul too, because I spend my time auditing native apps against WCAG AA, and I'd say 99% of my testing is manual. And it is time consuming. It's, taking screenshots, depending on what platform you're on, can take longer. So it's look, I love it. I have a bit of a test plan that I follow. I do rely heavily on the assistive features, like for instance on iOS, voiceover and voice control. It's manual, so it's logging issues. I will admit I use Excel. I've automated a few things, which I'm happy about. But I guess what we found is the maturity of automation tools when it comes to app isn't yet there. What we have now compared to 3 years ago is so much more. So it's really, it's I think a fast moving area, which is exciting. And I certainly have tried out a few tools. If I were to, I guess when I would use an automation tool would be if I was testing a new app from scratch and I wanted to quickly find a lot of issues. If I knew there was no accessibility consideration put into the app, that's when I would use one. For an app that is already relatively accessible, I think manual testing is kind of where you're gonna be able to pick up the ones that aren't found with automation testing. And I guess that's why I need to rely heavily on manual testing still for pretty much all my testing. But yeah, so native app testing is what I focus on, and it's certainly quite different when you're comparing like mobile testing, web to native app testing. Different things to consider.
Paul, you had a response?
Yeah, like I see that in the market, that like a lot of web accessibility firms, but also what Geneva was telling that you are using WCAG to test mobile apps, and that's by law it's the right thing to do, but you're missing interpretation part. And at a certain moment we were invited as experts on the mobile accessibility task force, and we're trying to create guidance on how to test WCAG on a mobile device. And big part of that, of course, where the big differences are, is with mobile testing, because one example, with websites you have like certain like standard components, but in apps, what is a standard component? What is a page or a screen? Like how to deal with that? And it has what is assistive technology on your device? Like everything is there available. Is it assistive technology? Like that definitions make that if you read it in a little bit different way, it's either you can like make everything like accessible by default, or completely inaccessible and it's not possible to fix it as well. So it's like with mobile, with websites there's a gray area, and with mobile it's like way bigger. So that we're trying with the mobile task force also to create guidance that that everyone is doing the right things when they're testing and fixing apps, and so that also for end users the fixes are everywhere the same, and the expectations are everywhere the same, and that apps can be built accessible, but also that authorities can say like this is right, this is wrong. But that part is still missing. And
So when we were writing the testing methodology, we had that same problem. We called the screen readers and stuff like that assistive technologies, but they're not always assistive technologies. So we called them assistive technologies and mobile features as a way to kind of expand that that definition. Raf, you have something to say?
Yes. I'd like to say that this problem with defining assistive technologies on mobile devices results in also in a confusion confusion for people who are to decide, for instance, in large organizations, what should be done, what shouldn't be, because now I more and more often see certain misunderstanding that people believe that if there are assistive technologies on mobile devices, then they should not take care about accessibility. They think that everything is accessible by default.
Yes, that's definitely a problem. And while we have you, Raf, do you conduct both mobile site and native app testing?
Yes, I conduct both testing. Actually, I prefer testing mobile apps.
Interesting.
They are on the one hand, they are less boring. On the other hand, they are often quicker to test because pages are slow. I know I know how it sounds, but when you do testing with a screen reader, it really matters if you can go quickly through the app, and usually you can. Of course, if there are issues, there are problems, but you can do testing quite quickly. And as regards web pages, they are usually very slow. There's always plenty of elements, etc., etc. So on the one hand, they are more boring. On the other hand, they are more difficult to test, I'd say.
Yes, there's just a comment from Patrick. The lengthy discussions about does an app need to adapt to dark mode. I actually use dark mode constantly. And one of the things I've noticed is if sometimes I don't notice that something's not working because I'm using dark mode. I use dark mode because I use my phone all the time, and otherwise I won't have a battery by halfway through the day. So I don't use it for accessibility features, but I don't even notice when something is not working just because dark mode hasn't been tested for. So God help the people who actually need dark mode and can't see it any other way. So yes, it can be very problematic. Paul, quick comment before I get to Ricky.
Yeah, and with dark mode, it's very interesting discussion. But what we see on the App Foundation, we did like a research on 6 million Dutch people reading out their accessibility settings. It's 1/3, so it's quite a It's I think in the world the most representative study. And we found that 1 in 4 people is having dark mode as their default. So if you're like a developer, designer, and you say, yeah, I know that 1 in 4 want it, but I'm just not going to do that, then you don't have to do any research. You just like going to just add all the components to the screen, that it's like, you don't have to think about it at all, because if 1 in 4 want something, so probably you should listen to that. It's the same with resizing of text. It's also one of this, like in WCAG, if you like read at the definitions, I don't know if zoom will be sufficient, or that like really you should be able to resize the text. It's one of the discussions that are there. EN is like helping a little bit out in a separate chapter. It's referring to like if a user wants something, probably you should like make that version accessible as well. So then like dark mode, maybe you should test for dark mode. You should test for the larger font size, but it's yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a really good point. If you know the name of the study, please put it in the chat. Ricky, do you do both mobile site and native app testing? Do you have a preference?
I envy people who can say, I just test native apps. I test the full gamut, everything. And that is, whatever it is that our clients require, and that is the full range of stuff. I still test MDOT sites, web content that was specifically repurposed to fit on a mobile phone. This is part of the job for me. And it's actually a part that I really enjoy, because if you can make something accessible, no matter what format it's in, then that is very satisfying to be able to do. But what I do, the way that I see it is that web content, the web content accessibility guidelines were never intended to cover mobile content, whether that's web content on mobile or native apps. And we're kind of pushing the barriers of what testing is and can achieve and how to do it, simply because we want to make everything accessible. So in my job, it's really testing everything. When responsive web design came along, it was a terrific thing because it meant people were making web content accessible on mobile, but it also introduced some kind of ironies. Responsive web design is now so pervasive that we don't even call it responsive web design anymore. It's just what web design is. And that took maybe 4 years to go from an idea and a slogan to being implemented. And here we are 25 years later with accessibility, and we're still struggling to get people to understand it, let alone accept it. Yeah. So I actually like that part of the job. It's part of the challenge. And part of the challenge is making sure that developers who work in native apps understand what accessibility is and why it's important, especially in the context of, we still call them mobile phones, but the phone part of the mobile is probably the least used these days. It's everything else that's on a mobile device that gets used, and all of it has to be accessible. So I test the full gamut, everything.
So just as I have a bone to pick with you on just one comment. So I did spend some time working with the W3C WCAG working group on WCAG 2, and we were trying, the big thing about it was that we're trying to make it technology neutral, and I did argue that that's impossible, and of course that's wasn't met because he had requirements like make sure everything is accessible to the keyboard, and he didn't have requirements which said make sure everything is accessible to touch or make sure everything is accessible to mouse. Now in WCAG 2.1 and 2.2 they've addressed those things, but when we were working on WCAG, and this is the early 2000s, we really wanted to not have to write another WCAG. We were talking then about having displays the size of a wall. And so flickering content, which can trigger epileptic attacks in some individuals, they were saying, well, you know, one of my arguments is that you know, if you had 25% of a wall that was flickering, that could still trigger an epileptic attack. But that's actually in WCAG, that if only 25% of an area is flickering, then you don't need to worry about it. So we really had no idea what the world would be like. And we did have mobile sites back then, but they were tiny. They were this big, and they were the desktop site in a tiny little screen this big, and they were monochrome. And basically, you know, the iPhone came out in 2007, 2008, and that was basically when WCAG 2 was released. So yes, well, that really, even though WCAG is supposed to apply to native apps, it really doesn't. And I'll get off my high horse because I realize I'm not one of the panelists, I'm with the MC. So tell me, what you think the biggest differences are between desktop testing and mobile testing. Raf, I think I'll throw this one to you.
Oh, okay, I can start. For me, I'm not a developer, so for me the biggest difference is that I don't have access to code for mobile apps. Yes, when I test web pages, I can see the code, I can understand it. And as regards apps, I cannot. So first of all, it's always difficult to see the code for the app because you need to have access. And the other hand is knowing the programming language. And of course, the testing itself is different because I'm testing with a screen reader. So of course, you use a screen reader differently on desktop, on a computer, and differently on a smartphone.
Excellent. And Genevieve, what about yourself? Do you do any desktop testing? If you're just doing native app testing, do you ever look at a desktop?
I feel lucky after hearing all these comments that I am just doing native app testing. I mean, I used to do desktop testing. For me, the biggest difference and the transition when I moved into native app was just the fact that I can't right click and inspect to see what's going on under the hood. There's a big learning curve there, and I think you start at nothing and you gradually grow to understand how the tools that you have available to you, how you can become a bit of a detective to figure out what's going wrong in native app. Sorry, I'm talking about native app here, not just mobile testing on web. So yeah, for me, that was the biggest learning curve. And it's still, it's a significant change if people are moving into native app testing from web desktop testing. Like you can't just right click and inspect and check the color of text, for instance, to verify a contrast defect. You need to jump through quite a few more hoops on native app to figure that out. And even then, if you go to a developer and ask them if they have the code, or if you're lucky enough to have the code on your machine, you can figure it out. But if you go to a developer, you might not even get the right response. There might be some opacity set on top of the color that they've given you. So I think the biggest one is, the fact that it's a lot harder to figure out what's going wrong in native app when you're testing.
Do you use voice control to determine what the accessible name of an item is? Because when voice control first came out, that's what I started using it for, and I found it was just amazing. You can just see all the accessible names at once.
It's great, isn't it? And also the numbers too for the ordering. It's
so there's some tips and tricks. I wrote an article about it. I just put it in the chat. Paul, what about yourself? How do you find desktop and mobile testing to be different?
It's a wrong question to ask me because I'm only focusing on mobile apps. So I don't know. I never went to the website before, so I would not know.
But you put your name down to answer this question.
Yeah. But I think if the question is like desktop testing, I know, of course, with like inspecting, I think, yeah, that, and also the reporting part is different, and that you're fully dependent on assistive technology. So that's what I know, and I think it's interesting, yeah, to.
Robert Henley says, just as a note, that voice control no longer exposes the full accessible name. Yes, you're right. It just shows the first beginning part of it. But yes, so I might have to revise that article. I'm not going to ask you this one, Paul, because we know how you feel about manually testing apps. You know, Ricky, how do you report issues when you're manually testing apps?
Well, you have to put it in the context that when I'm reporting issues, it is to get to a point where I can inform our accessibility engineers what to tell our clients and how to handle our clients. So I'm writing advice for our testers rather than for the end clients. And in that sense, I have a very broad brief, whatever it takes to get the message across. I guess that's kind of an unusual situation in that, you know, we have a small team called the Knowledge Center, whereas that's all we do. We just test in that sense, and we test manually, we test with automated tools, we test with our own tools, we test with other people's tools, whatever it takes to get to a point where we feel we have advice that we can give that is solid, that can be followed, that meets the standards, whether they are WCAG or any other standards that might apply. And what we really do is write plain advice. And we have a lot of, you know, leeway in how we do that. The only kind of imperative for us is that we just can't be wrong. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Because that's something that everyone agrees on the right answer when it comes to accessibility, right?
Of course. We've just gone through a thing where we've had like a 2-week process of deciding on a procedure for when somebody says, no, this is not right. How do we resolve it? Who resolves it? And how do we make the decision about what to tell clients?
Yeah. Yes, it is frustrating. Jen, how do you like document the issues when you're manually testing?
Oh, I think I admitted to Excel previously, which I'm not proud of. But
but do you take screenshots? Do you try and record if VoiceOver is doing something weird? Do you try and record what VoiceOver is saying?
Yeah, I take a lot of video. I take a lot of screen captures, which certainly helps the developers see the issues. With VoiceOver on or TalkBack on. Much more video than screenshots, and with a video, I'm able to capture like multiple defects, and then I document them. Trying to use WCAG terminology, not the complex one, but the basics, and as well as referring to other sources, because as we've touched on before, not all WCAG success criterion can be easily applied to native apps. So we go to other places and find other resources that do help us be able to translate that for native app. But yeah, Excel automated script goes up into Jira. A lot of videos, SharePoint. Thankful for AirDrop. In a nutshell.
Yeah, excellent. So, Raf, I'm going to ask you this question. How do you, because I know that you do testing outside of the screen reader testing, so how do you manage the device, you know, assistive technology balance? Like, should testing cover everything? Or, you know, how do you decide what's the most important thing to test?
All depends on time. Yes, I'd say that's time and what is agreed with the customer. Of course, one should do testing, and that's what we do on iOS and on Android. Never forget about Android. That's my general comment. And of course, you shouldn't limit yourself to it. So if we test a mobile app, so then it is quite obvious. Yes, iOS with voiceover as regards screen readers, and Android with TalkBack. But here the situation becomes more complex because you should do testing on Google device and on Samsung, and it would be also good to do some testing on, for instance, Huawei. Then if it is a web page, so also browsers matter, at least Chrome and Firefox, and preferably, of course, Safari on iOS. And actually, I've noticed that the biggest differences are between Safari and Chrome. And then it all depends on time, how much testing you want to do as regards earlier versions on earlier versions of iOS, Android, etc.
Yeah. Paul, I was going to throw to you. How do you decide to how do you manage the device, operating system, browser, AT balance?
Yeah, we at a certain moment decided that we're only going to use like one device. So it's like either Android and iOS, of course, but like one device, one software version, and that we only use one assistive technology at the same time. Because if you don't stick to that, if I'm going to use an app with the largest font size, if I use then the screen reader to check if the order is still correct, because the changes of size, the order changes. And if I do that in landscape mode with larger font size, with the screen reader on, also using the external keyboard to navigate, then I'm really sure that in one of the versions it goes wrong, and that sometimes you cannot even fix it. So we decided at a certain moment, because you need to test manually, that there should be certain limit of what you're testing in if we do an audit. But it has its limitations, and that's also I wanted to ask a question, not to add something, but like I'm really curious how, like Geneva and also Rafael, if you're testing, like where do you stop? Like, are you using combinations of assistive technology when testing? Like, are you like having multiple devices, multiple software version? Because I know it influences. So I'm really curious, like how you do that.
Yeah, Genevieve. Yeah, please answer.
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. I make sure I don't have multiple accessibility features on at the same time. So I always only, and I've found issues with having like full keyboard access on at the same time as VoiceOver, for instance. If I see something a little bit weird happening in my testing, I'll just go back and check which settings I actually have on and make sure I've toggled all the others off. So yeah, I think that's important, to make sure you only have one on at a time, because they aren't, as I understand, they aren't supported to have multiple ones on at the one time. So you will come across, I'd say, false positives in your testing if that's the case.
When iOS first released VoiceOver, you could only turn it on if you also had an external keyboard turned on. It was really annoying. Oh, it's so annoying. Raf, did you want to answer that? Sort of.
I think I've already answered. So you need to calculate your I'd say yes, your time, and the recommendation for the customer is one thing, and what you can do also for the money the customer pays. Yes, it's a different thing. So whenever I can, I do test on at least on 2 Android devices, and it's great if there's a chance to do iOS testing on also on 2 different devices. I do some extra work for a bank in Poland, and we noticed differences between also various iOS devices. Of course, it all depended on iOS used on the device. And of course, you need to decide how far you want to go.
And one thing I just want to add also, in our testing, we found that if you're using a Samsung device to test, it's always a good idea to download Chrome and test on Chrome instead of the browser. That's the app, what the app is called, that comes with Samsung, because that's a much better representation of what other Android devices will show. If you wanted to see what it looks like on Samsung devices, then test with the browser app, but it's much better to test with Chrome. I just want to say it's 10 to 7 now, and so if you want to have a bit of a break, we're going to continue, and stretch your legs. You know, we're not going to get offended if you leave. But Raf, you wanted to say something, and then I'll throw it to Ricky.
Just a comment that you also, as regards screen testing, you need to remember that TalkBack from Google and TalkBack from Samsung may behave differently, so it's also another problem.
Yes, and then yes, Google, they just like to do everything themselves. Ricky, how do you manage the device operating system browser AT balance?
Frankly, for me, this is the most fun part of the job. I have my own little device lab here. I am surrounded by 14 different devices. I have a new iPhone, an old iPhone. I have a Samsung phone. I have a Google phone. I have tablets, and I love testing on all of them. It's the most fun part of the job. I will use the Samsung screen reader, which is fun.
That's one way to describe it.
But the fact of the matter is, you know, there are people who use that because that's just what they started using, so they continue using it. So I test with it. But I honestly, look, I really enjoy that part of the job. It kind of throws up some oddities, and this is probably in relation to a question that's likely to come up later. But I think one of the interesting things that has happened in mobile devices, and I include tablets in mobile devices as well as phones, is that the old idea of like having breakpoints where the display would change according to set pixel sizes has completely gone out the window because the range of screen sizes is now like tiny increments from quite small phone sizes to very large tablets, and in fact laptops that are touch, you know, a Surface Touch laptop. So everything's got to be in percentages rather than in pixels these days, or at least, you know, relative ends. And that kind of, you know, means you can't test for every possible screen size. That is simply not possible. Even geeks like me who have big device labs, you can't measure every possible option that exists. So at some point, you have to make decisions about what are we going to test and what are we not going to test. Just in terms of the devices and the operating systems. But that to me means I go for things that are shown to be in popular use. And that's kind of, you know, it's a kind of a hazy rule of thumb. There's no specific guidelines on that, but you can generally tell that, you know, certain phones are used more than others. Certain screen readers are used more than others. You know, I don't even test with links anymore, even though that's a very good testing mechanism. But yeah, so I mean, I'm fortunate that I'm able to indulge myself and have fun with testing on different combinations of devices and operating systems and software and assistive technology. But there has to be a limit. You can't test for everything.
That sounds like heaven. Unfortunately, whenever I upgrade my devices, one of my family members gets my old device. So I don't have mine. Whereas I think I need to start keeping mine. Because at AccessibilityOz, we test one version. Paul, you wanted to say something.
I want to ask Ricky how he's testing for target size. Because it's like the target size rule in mobile is dependent also on the screen size. So if you have to make that calculation for 15 different screens, like devices, to test target size for like on one screen, it will take you so much time if you cannot do that automatically. How are you doing that? I'm really curious.
Just manually, literally,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's the thing, that is a good example of something that, there isn't really any kind of automated test for it. So it's you can look to a certain extent at the code and configurations behind it. And even on mobile devices, you can, to a certain extent, inspect the Swift and on mobile frameworks, Flutter, and to see whether somebody has set specific sizes using properties. But in practical terms for testing, I do it manually. And that is, to me, that's reflecting common use rather than an academic sense of testing. So I just try to imitate a user.
Okay.
Excellent.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So we've got a question from the chat, which is, I've just lost it. Do you always test with the very latest operating system versions? So I'm going to quickly just give us a sentence or two. Paul, tell us, do you test just with the latest operating system versions, or do you go back away?
I test with one device, and sometimes it's updated, sometimes it has like one version lower. But you should not test with a very old version, because it will not have the full capabilities, and it ends up in issues that are not that's the problem. Like you have you're dependent on your assistive technologies to indicate if something is an error, yes or no. And if you use an old assistive technology or an old version, you will get issues that are not issues anymore on the newer devices. And that's also a level don't use way older version, like the current or like one less. That's okay, but don't use older versions, because it's problematic. And also, but it's also unfair because people are still using that. So it's always like a balance. Again, also what Rafael was explaining, what did you agree on with the customer? I can imagine it if you're like having an app with, I don't know, 1 billion users that you want to test with maybe 3 or 4 years back, or maybe even longer back. Question about money, as always, because it's all manually, almost all manually.
Yeah. And Genevieve, what about yourself?
Yeah, I don't work with devices that are actually on the latest OS. My personal device is, because I'm curious about things like liquid glass. But I do make sure they're no older than at least two versions behind the latest, because as Paul mentioned, I think things like talkback versions, and it can get a little bit messy if your OS is quite out of date. But I also think in the real world, not everyone has the latest OS, so it's not imperative that you're testing on a device that's up to date to the very nth degree. So I test on an iPhone SE, which is quite small, which I like because I feel like I capture a few more issues given that the size is smaller. And then with Android, I have two devices. And I have a Google Pixel, which I love, and a Samsung device. And I think it's important, particularly with Android, to if you've found an issue on one device, it's good to cross-check on another device, just because there's such a range of devices. But yeah, not on the latest OS, which is surprising given that I work for Telstra.
Ricky, your 14 devices, what are they all running?
I have some that are the latest version and some that are older versions. I do think it is worth testing a couple of versions back from an operating system because they're in popular use. And that point about not everybody has the latest versions is a very valid one. And in some ways, I think that often applies more to people with disabilities than it does to other people because they can't afford to upgrade. Some of that is, some devices upgrade automatically, and sometimes you can kind of force the situation. Like I have an older MacBook Air that can't upgrade because it doesn't have enough space on the hard disk to upgrade to the latest version. So that's fine. It just stays at an older version. I assume there are people that are in that position. So what I'm doing is hopefully reflecting common use. So I try to cover all the points.
Excellent. Genevieve, I'd like to ask you, do you, in your native app testing, obviously you say you're testing against WCAG, but that's a little bit hard. Do you ever go beyond WCAG? Do you ever look at WCAG and go, hey, that's not enough. They're definitely wrong here. We need to test more than that. My favorite example is in WCAG 1, which was released in 1999. You couldn't have click here links. So, and they're quite annoying for screen reader users, because screen reader users can pull out all the links in a page. And if you have 5 click here links, they'll have no idea where those links are going. But of course, in WCAG 2, you are allowed to have click here links unless you're trying for AAA. So that's just one example where you could go beyond WCAG. Are there other things that, you decide that, WCAG's not enough, you need to go further?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think I hope we move more into a space where those areas can be kind of enforced like WCAG defects. I do identify issues that aren't in WCAG, and I raise them under what's called an expert observation, and they get fixed most of the time. Things like, and it's also dependent on what type of feature I'm testing on a native app, but if I'm testing a feature that has a lot of animation, for instance, I'll go in and toggle on the reduced motion setting in the accessibility features. And that's not strictly a WCAG success criterion. There is ones that do relate to animation, but ensuring that setting is respected in the code, I think is very important, especially depending on how much animation you have on your screen. So things like that, I think, specifically when we're talking about native app, really important, because there's gaps in WCAG 100%. And even more so when you're talking about applying WCAG to native app, there's pretty massive gaps. So I don't think we can overlook them, given how many people are using their phones, relying on them, as well as using the assistive features on the phones.
And so have you actually found anything that passes that reduced motion?
Well, on Android, and I think we have people in the chat here who can either confirm this. On Android, I think by default, the reduced motion is respected without the developers doing anything additional. On iOS, I believe there needs to be work done. So when I tested on Android, it does work.
I must say I haven't tested it on Android for a while, but a few years back it didn't. But yeah, I've actually, because I tell developers all the time, you got this movement, you need to honor reduced motion, and they're like, well, no one does that. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure someone does that.
It's so important, yeah. And I think there's a lot of people that rely on that setting. So yeah, it's a great example.
Paul, what about yourself? Do you go above WCAG? Does your tool go above WCAG, beyond WCAG?
Yeah, we try to help our customers to make accessible apps, and it's like part of the rules are connected to, let's say, like users that need something, and part of it's connected to WCAG. But we try to, when we interpret WCAG, to have the user in mind. And so that if there's like for example, when you test like this resizing of text, some people say like, okay, assistive technology, you are allowed to use zoom, and then you put the burden at the user. And we, at a certain moment, said we don't accept zoom to be enough to resize text, because it will be the burden of the user. We interpret it in a different way. 1 in 3 people is using different text size. We just fail you if you don't, like, if a user says, I want to have like 200% scaling, it should work, because that's the intent, the ID behind the WCAG criteria, and then we just fail you on it. And yeah, if you don't agree with it, then yeah, the users, it's so important for users, then we deviate from like what WCAG is demanding. And yeah, that's, I don't think you can do it differently, because like you have a roadmap that is has its limitations, so you should also use that limitation sometimes to make it a little bit better for the end user. And yeah, it's a tricky tricky. It's tricky sometimes because you want you can do like great WCAG audits, and I think that on most success criteria, if I read it like really carefully, like with web pages and like there's no like with WCAG EM as an example, like go to your website, check your web pages, and I was like, okay, there's no web pages in my app, I'm done.
Yeah.
But you can interpret it like a little bit differently, saying like, okay, I have a mobile app, and you know there are certain screens, and I don't know the exact definition, but I'm able to work with that, and it will be better for end users not to say like, yeah, I followed the WCAG evaluation method, I didn't find any screen or like any pages, so I'm done. Yeah. That's not the right approach, I think. So you should read between the lines sometimes in the interest of the end user.
Yeah, definitely. Great answer. Ricky, what about yourself? Do you go beyond WCAG?
We definitely try to. Like in working with clients, it's often an imperative that they bring to say, okay, we need to comply with legislation. We're trying to avoid getting sued. So we need to conform to WCAG AA 2.2 or 2.1 or 2.0, depending on what piece of legislation they're referring to. What that ends up for us in practice is that we have a set of automated rules and a set of manual testing rules that are about WCAG conformance. And then we have another set of criteria that are more than WCAG in number that we call best practice. There's a bit of controversy about whether that's an appropriate term at the moment because people go, best practice means it's optional. But we try to tell our clients, if you want to make accessible products, this is what you should do. So it's wherever possible, go over and above WCAG, but it's a constant argument. And we constantly have clients pushing back on that, saying, yeah, that's nice, but that's a nice to have. That's not a must have in order to avoid getting sued. So it's a conversation that we have with our client, shall we say.
And Raf, what about you? And I also want to add, have you noticed more click heres since WCAG 2 was released, and how annoying are they?
In mobile apps, I'm not sure, so I cannot say actually. But as regards the question, I pay a lot of attention to user experience. So if something can be made easier, I recommend it. Also, the screen output. Sometimes all the texts in the app or on the page are quite fine, but when read by a screen reader, they may be confusing. So I pay attention to it. And also some extra things, like for instance, if the app has audio and video content, I check if it works fine with headset. If you can pause it by pressing the button on the headset, if Magic Tab works, for instance, or if Magic Tab should be added for something, etc. So things like that.
Excellent, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions from the chat. And I'm going to start with you, Genevieve. How would you describe the method of your testing? For example, do you test each screen one test criteria at a time? Or do you scan over a screen and when you observe a problem, then figure out which test criteria has failed? Kind of like look at the screen and go, there's an error, there's an error, there's an error.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's important because I test features within an app to test the kind of the end-to-end flow of the feature. So it's not just like one screen going through each success criterion. So I will run through the entire flow that I'm being asked to audit. And I'll take screen captures, videos along the way. And I'll turn on, I have a kind of system that I follow. Like first I'll turn on VoiceOver and I'll run through the feature and make sure that I can use it with VoiceOver. I'll then log defects that I find. and then I'll turn that off, and then I'll run through the same feature using voice control. I'm just using iOS as an example here, but I do it on both platforms. Turn off that one, run through the feature again. I might toggle on and off the large text as I go at different points. Log any defects that I find there. Then also switch between orientation modes as I'm testing. Yeah, it's. I mean, I have a system that I use, and it's quite straightforward. But I think it's important, especially if you're testing like a journey that a customer will make. It's important that you get that full flow from start to finish, and understand that a customer can carry out that entire flow relying just on VoiceOver, for instance. So that's kind of in a nutshell the method that I use. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, that's great. Ricky, what about yourself? How do you conduct native app testing?
I have a set procedure, and it's based on, I'll actually put it in the chat in reply to that question, which is based on, we have a few accessibility engineers who focus on mobile testing, and 3 of them got together to do a presentation at CSUN last year, and then I talked them into doing blog posts about that presentation, because it has a very good procedure, and it's based on the idea of moving through a number of steps. So testing with a screen reader, testing for things like images, all of that kind of stuff, testing for keyboard access. I'll find the link now and I'll put it in there, and that's basically the procedure that I follow. But I also will use that idea of a user workflow. If somebody is on mobile phone and they've got to go to Coles and they've got to order some products, then there is a set series of steps, and how does that work with all the accessibility options, and is it all accessible? And you can do it with VoiceOver or TalkBack. You can do it without that, and because that's also a thing, you can do it with using enlarged text, all of that. So it's kind of, on the one hand, trying to achieve something specific. On the other hand, moving through all the possible ways of engaging with the content on a mobile device. Does that make sense?
Excellent. So, and this one I'll hand first to Paul. If you were training new accessibility testers, what testing method would you suggest they follow initially? Now, guessing your answer is going to be automated, but tell us a bit about how you would go about. No, tell us, take it away.
No, well, I like there's you have a testing that you can do automatically, manually, and with users. Like in the beginning, you should start with, if you can find something automatically, do it. But you need also to learn how to interpret those results. Otherwise, you are not getting anywhere. But if you can do something automatically, it's great. Start with manually testing with small scope, and add user testing from the beginning. But not that they test and give you feedback on individual issues, but for awareness purposes. And the more you mature, automated testing will not find anything at a certain moment anymore, because your processes are really nice. Manual testing will be so efficient that even if you find something that you can also find automatically, it only takes you seconds to add. So to have 2 different flows, it takes you more time even than automation. So at a certain moment, automation is only nice for, like finding the, so manual testing is important, and in the end you will, I think, only be doing user testing, because like if you have your processes under control, you don't need any it will, in the end you will be focusing on like user testing. That will be the biggest chunk of the work, because in the end that's what it's about. Because otherwise, if you find something manually, you should look at your processes that it will not occur in the future. So we see that automation is a trigger for teams to get started. So if you don't get any triggers, you will not get started. You will not start learning, and you will not have the learning curve. So it's important there. But manual testing for it, at least for testers, start small. Like contrast is not difficult, orientation is not difficult. Larger font size, are all letters still there? Can you do everything? screen reader, like swipe to the next element? Is it like what you see? Is it, do you hear it? Keyboard, can you go to all interactive elements? It's not that complicated. Of course, to get like to the last 20%, then you need to have like a super expert. But I think that if each designer and developer and tester can get to 80%, you already make really much difference. And then also the party that does the audit will find something, of course, in the end, and you need to fix those as well to make your app like really, really, really good. But if you don't focus on the steps before, an auditor will find too much and it will be very costly. So you should focus on the process, and that's it's a combination of testing. So automated testing is not the solution, but it can help to trigger and to get people moving. And I think that's for most teams necessary. That's what I see at least a lot, that triggers. People should start.
So Ricky, I know you've done a lot of training of people. So how would you train any new accessibility testers, especially in the native app space?
That's a really tricky question, actually. And
well, you've only got 3 minutes.
Right. Let's just say that at this stage, with the company that I work with, we are still very much working that out. There were an existing couple of training courses that TPGi had on testing mobile accessibility that were way out of date and not very useful. And I updated them. And in the process, I realized I could write 10 training courses on this. I've restricted myself to 2 very basic ones that were an approach to testing accessibility on mobile, rather than all the detail that I would have liked to have gone into. And I think that the links that I actually put in the chat to the blog version of the CSUN presentation is a good pattern or a template that I would suggest to people approaching mobile accessibility testing for the first time.
Excellent, thank you. This one I'm going to give to Raf. Ask Raf, because I have experience of seeing Raf's work, and he goes much more detailed than I do. So how detailed are your solutions? You know, especially we're testers, we're not developers. We sometimes don't have access to the code. How do you decide how detailed a solution should be, or, you know, an error should be?
You mean the error description?
Yes.
Again, it depends for whom you report. If it is an external customer, it must be written in such a way that the customer who is not familiar with accessibility understands the issue, understands what happens, and of course is able to reproduce the issue. But that's obvious. If you report issues within an organization that does accessibility testing for themselves, so the reporting may be different because, for instance, I work in a company where the developers were more and more familiar with accessibility due to my reports. So I didn't have to write everything with details. It was enough to give steps to reproduce and give the expected result and current result. That was all. Sometimes I needed to add a screenshot.
Excellent. Does anyone, so I'm opening it up to the panel, do any of you provide really detailed solutions? For example, like React Native code and things like that when it comes to native app testing and reporting? Jump in, unless that's all a no.
I can, yeah, my answer would be no. I'm fortunate to work in a team where we've been focusing on accessibility in the native app space for long enough that I don't need to put too much detail into my defects for the developers because they know how to fix it. If that wasn't the case, which I think is pretty common in many companies, which probably goes to the question around education in universities to do with accessibility when you're learning about coding. But generally, there is resources out there where you can, and Abra, I think Paul and team there's some great work being done where you can get code snippets if you're not a native app developer yourself, which I'm not, to understand how to correctly fix accessibility defects and use the right terminology that the developers will then be able to apply themselves. So that's the route I would take if I wasn't in a team where the developers are already across how to make accessibility fixes.
Ricky, you
At
said in the chat,
TPGi, we very much do. We are increasingly writing very detailed and code-specific solutions so that if you're on iOS and you're using Swift, then this is the code to use, this is the property to use, and we're getting very positive responses from our clients in that. They want the specific code that they should be using. And we're fortunate that we have a large group of engineers. We have a small number who are becoming very adept at doing this.
Excellent. Okay, so I have one final question for all of you, and please try and keep short. If you could test only one thing in a native app, what would it be? Paul, let's go to you.
Only one thing. I think the resizing of text, because it's used by so many people. It's very important.
Excellent. Genevieve?
No, you stole mine, Paul. I was going to say the same. I think I'm going to be using it very soon. Maybe not very soon, but I think it's just one of those ones that we may all end up using if we're not already using, and it's just so handy. So let's really focus on it. Let's get it right. There's no reason why we shouldn't be.
Raf?
Probably if I would check if controls have labels, but with AI-based AI description tools now, users may deal with it. So I'm not sure what is most important now.
And last but not least, Ricky.
I would probably, if I only had to choose one, it would probably be the accessibility of the touch targets, the targets themselves and the spaces between them. Seeing people just tap madly on a screen and getting no results at all, it just it shouldn't be like that.
That's actually one of the reasons why we wrote these guidelines, because when WCAG 2.1 came out, they relegated the touch target size requirements to AAA. And I like to say AAA is where success criteria go to die. And so, of course, in 2.2, they put it in AA. But that's why we wrote those guidelines, because everyone in the industry was like, these guidelines are not enough. Genevieve, you had something else to say?
I was just going to ask Ricky what do you think the target size should be for native app?
Specifically in terms of pixel sizes, etc.
Yeah, well, well, not pixel for native app.
I mean, it depends on the size of the screen, but relative to the size of the screen, I prefer a larger size, 44 by 44. But I certainly think it should conform to a minimum of 24 by 24 with enough space in between.
Yeah, WCAG definitely has some problems, which is why, there's so many other mobile requirements out there. As Patrick just said in the chat, you can actually have a 1.1 pixel target size, and it's fine according to WCAG if it has a sufficient 24 by 24 pixel clearance, which of course is ridiculous. Anyway, I'm sure we can all agree on that. I'm going to hand it back to Bree. Thank you. This was a fantastic panel. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully you found it useful. There's some great resources in the chat, so make sure you grab them before the session closes. And over to Bree. Thank you so much for having us all.
Oh, no, thank you, everyone on the panel. Raf, Paul, Jen, Ricky, and Gian, thank you. Wonderful moderating. We will make sure that all those resources are there with the recording, so you do not have to jump in and go and grab them. We will do that for you. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session, so much to learn, so much to share, still showing really how much, technology and accessibility, as Ricky said, we thought we were doing ourselves out of a job. We're not. So another reason why OZeWAI is there, to help build that environment for everyone to learn and grow, and really, really appreciate everyone for their time, especially in the evening in Australia, but morning, obviously, in Europe over there. I've put a link in the chat to the latest newsletter. Thank you, Ricky, for a wonderful newsletter to promote this today. We got that out early. And there's also a couple of really important sessions coming up in October to do with the review for the Disability Discrimination Act. So OZeWAI is going to run a couple of workshops just to put a submission in as well. So please check that one out. We also have a couple of follow-on from the accessibility testing sessions for October and November. We've got one for PDFs that Amanda will be moderating, and another one in November for ARIA. And Andrew, if you're still on the call, I've put you down for that one. Anyone else that you think is a good person to be on our panel? Anyone that you've seen someone, doing something amazing in the work that you're doing, please reach out. We're always open to encourage, other panelists. And we love the support from the OZeWAI members as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for today. I'm going to stop the recording.